Yamadamurang, Nadu Yinjamara Gadigal Nurambang. Welcome, and I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. A new year revives an old debate. How does Australia settle its unfinished business? Tonight you will hear the cases for and against an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Joining our panel, Assistant Minister for Indigenous Australians and Yanyuwa Garra woman, Malarndirri McCarthy. Leader of the National Party in the Senate, Bridget McKenzie. Senior Australian of the Year, Tom Calma, who helped lead the Voice co-design process. Gunai Gunditz Mara and Jab Warang, Greens Senator for Victoria, Lidia Thorpe. And New South Wales Australian of the Year and Chair of the Republican Movement, Craig Foster.
My question as a voter is, will the government's proposal for the National Voice consist of 24 people appointed by regional and local voices and not an elected group? And they'll have an 8-year term limit, and I understand that was what was recommended in the Calma Langdon report. So this is really directed at the government. Is that the proposal that you're putting up? And will the 24 voice members be full-time and salaried? So,
thanks
to the Minister.
Thanks, Philip, for your question. What we have now at the moment, and you're right, that comes through with the Calma Langdon report. What we have now is the working group, and Professor Marcia Langton and Tom Calma are two of the people on that working group, and there is a referendum engagement group, and all of those people on that group are there to advise us as to where we go. Now, in the coming months, we will be able to have a better response as to what we want to do. But firstly, the question is really about whether Australians want to enable First Nations people to have involvement in policies that impact and affect them. And I think we have to be very clear that that's what we're asking through the question that the Prime Minister put to Calma on Yolngu country as a draft question to all Australians. So yes, what Tom Calma and Professor Langton in their report has made available to us, we are still working through with all of that, but they will be considerable points for us in the long run.
Can I just add to that? The Labor government have already picked their advisory body who is advising them now, and the other groups that they've set up, they've all been handpicked. Our communities haven't had a say.
But that's the issue here. It's not unusual.
Our people need to have a say on the grassroots level rather than the top down all the time.
But it's not unusual. It's not unusual. I mean, state and territory governments have that. No. It's perfectly normal for state and territory governments to have advisory groups, whether it's First Nations people, whether it's to do with the economy, whether it's to do with sporting bodies. This is what happens when you want to govern. But the question here is that if we did not work with First Nations people in developing a voice, then we would be attacked for not working with First Nations people, full stop.
Can I just say, as someone that was... Your question is a really good question because you've obviously looked at the detail of Tom and Marsha's report, and it is about local and regional voices feeding up into a national voice over time once that's bedded down. Our Cabinet put $38 million to start that process in the last budget, Assistant Minister. Your government cut that in your October budget, so that work that had started out of Tom and Marsha's report was already starting to be undertaken.
So you've jumped straight... details. So you've had the details.
No, I said I agree.
So you've had the details, 38 million, and you knew. So you walk away saying you don't have enough details.
No,
very interesting
No,
point
Malarndirri, I'm sorry, Senator. I did say I agreed with local and regional voices. I was very upfront with that. That was the first thing I said. We put money behind that. That is very different to asking the question you're wanting to ask people.
Craig, you've been sitting there very patient, my friend.
You are, yeah. I'm enjoying this.
I mean, you're listening to this, and of course we'll come to your issue a little bit later with the Republic, and that's something else down the line. But at a base level, a first principles level, how do you approach this?
This is one of the most important questions, one of the most transformative moments in modern Australian history, post-colonial history, and the big question is what we have to answer. And what I think we're hearing here are the concerns in the community that have to be addressed. However, we have to keep bringing it back to the main question, is whether we want to finally take this step to listen to the voices of First Australians. And we've never done so prior. This is an historic event. This is actually, I would say, it's more than once in a lifetime. It's once in many lifetime event for us to have an opportunity to listen. So listening to all of the...
And different points of view.
Yeah, different points of view. That's right.
As well.
Exactly. And so we need to break down all of the different viewpoints. That's fine. But from a perspective as a non-Indigenous Australian, our responsibility is to listen to also a process that has the cultural authority, and whereby the Uluru Statement, I think, had 250 leaders out at Uluru, and so we're in a position where we I think. Not that I speak on behalf of other people, but from my own perspective, we're in a position where we're now saying, and the country of Australia is now saying, we're listening and we want to listen to you. We want to bring this to life. There are issues over sequencing. However, this is really about embedding the rights to be listened to of First Nation people in our constitution,
so
which in many
your
respects
immediate response
is outdated.
The principle of this is to say yes to the voice.
And we have to keep coming back to this.
That's your position.
Now, just on that.
It's not cultural authority. The people who rocked up at Yulara, not Uluru, because remember, the Uluru family said no to even using the word in the beginning. But the people that rocked up were the ones that were picked by the Referendum Council. They were funded. They were from organisations and corporations who already have a mandate in controlling our affairs in our communities. So the problem at that meeting, whilst they say there was consensus, what do you call 20 people walking out of a meeting? Do you call that consensus? Or do you call that something that you'd probably need to address before you continue down the path?
I'll give Tom a chance to respond to that.
Only that I wasn't at Uluru and wasn't part of the dialogues, but my understanding is that it was, after they had the dialogues, it was a community who identified who would be the delegates that went to Uluru or to Yulara. And they made a... Well, if the community wants to pick an organisation, so be it. But it was led by the community. There were other groups that weren't invited and or weren't nominated by their communities who also turned up. And, that's okay. That's part of a democratic process. But, we can't say that it was the government or anybody else picked these people. The community nominated who they wanted.
The poor black fellas could not get all the way to Yulara. Can you imagine our communities who are struggling to survive each day, getting on a plane and going to the middle of the country and staying in a flash hotel? That was mainly organisations and corporations, and we've been saying it since that day. That's why the people walked out, because it was already a done deal with the people behind the scenes, and that's a frustration our people have.
That's, we've moved on.
But there wasn't a frustration for the Anangu people, and it wasn't a frustration for over 100 of the Aboriginal languages of the Northern Territory. If there was one time where we felt enormously proud of hosting First Nations people from across the country, it was that time, where the saltwater met the desert country, where the Yolngu came to Anangu country. That was where we felt incredibly proud to host it. It is an imperfect world.
It was cultural.
We will never, ever, as people, as humanity, get things perfect. But it is so important that we try and we never give up trying.
Yes, my question is for Lidia Thorpe. What practical provisions would you put into any treaty and the processes before and following them that would ensure that a treaty does not disadvantage Indigenous people and will protect their sovereignty? And how long do you think it would take to get this result?
Thank you for your question. I think that's a very important question, and only clans and nations can make decisions for themselves. Even to entertain the idea of a treaty, they have to have free, prior and informed consent and self-determine their own destiny, something that this other alternative does not give you. So a treaty is about peace. It's about us participating in this society in a way where we can prosper, like everybody else seems to do in this country. We're the sickest, poorest, dying every day. Nothing's going to change by an advisory body. we've told the government that we don't want to cede sovereignty. We've told the government to implement the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the Bringing Them Home report, which are 30 and 20-year-old reports. And we see the Closing the Gap report every year. Where are they failing? Incarceration and child stealing. They're two reports that even when Labor in power last time did not implement. So if we need to do anything in this country, it's save our life and implement those recommendations at the next sitting. It's so simple. But there's no political will from this government to do that.
Well, that's wrong. That's wrong. And I'll tell you why it's wrong. Because we know that we've got Senator Pat Dodson, who was a Royal Commissioner on the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and I've never worked with anyone who is more passionate of wanting to ensure that the incarceration rates in this country drop. There is no doubt that every state and territory jurisdiction has responsibility for the jails and for the custodial sentences, and there are many that need to improve their game. There's no doubt about that too. And in terms of sovereignty, well, we have said on numerous occasions, even as recent as the Senate estimates through the Attorney General's office, that sovereignty in terms of the voice, of course First Nations people will not cede sovereignty. I'm a Yanyuwagato woman from the Gulf of Carpentaria. We've never ceded sovereignty. And do you think I'd stand by and let that happen? No way. So please, it's a misnomer. Sovereignty will not be taken over or lost in this process.
How quickly, because part of the process here is voice treaty truth, that treaty should come from voice. How quickly will it move, if there was a successful referendum, to a treaty process?
Well, we've certainly made the commitment directly to the Uluru Statement from the Heart with voice treaty truth. We want to establish a Makarrata Commission, which we know is about when two sides come together.
Will this be the sort of treaty that Lidia is talking about?
Well, in terms of Lydia's thoughts in terms of a treaty, and this is where I did want to explore it once we went back to the Senate, but we know that a treaty is underway in different jurisdictions across the country at various levels, okay? So each state and territory are trying to do their best. We've seen in South Australia that they're already working towards a legislation in terms of a voice and treaty. So we know in the Northern Territory we're trying to do the same. Now, we're all at different levels of that, but whether the federal government can do that sooner, well, that's obviously a debate we still have to have in the Senate.
But it does play into whether people are going to vote for the voice or not. And, you know, I'm obviously quite well declare where I'll be voting and what our
Are you
party's
also opposed
decided.
to a treaty as well as the voice?
To answer the question, though, I was speaking to locals in the northeast of Victoria, Aboriginal locals, about this exact question. They were supportive of the voice until they heard the Prime Minister say it's just an advisory body, it's only got advisory capacity.
So you would like it to have more power?
I'm telling you what Indigenous Australians that I represent in
That's
Victoria...
my mob you're talking to.
Yeah, well, that I spoke to. I don't presume to speak on behalf of Indigenous Australians, Stan. I wouldn't do that. But what they've told me is that they were going to vote for the voice until Albo said that, and now exactly saying Victoria is well down the path to treaty, and so they think the voice is something more remote communities need and that Victoria is well on the way.
Yeah, they're setting up a treaty mechanism in Victoria, so they've still got to negotiate all the treaties.
They've put a list of demands in.
Yes, and what they might do. But what we've got to remember is that a treaty is between two sovereign parties. And the only real treaty that we've seen in Australia at the moment is the Noongar native title claim over Perth, where the West Australian government and the Noongar people came to an agreement. There was land swapping, there was, compensation paid. That's what a treaty's about. And at the Commonwealth level, that is going to be extremely hard because we'll have to have 250, 300 individual treaties across the nation.
Lidia, can I just ask you before we move on to the next question as well? There will come a time this year, we know that the referendum is on the agenda and there's going to be a date set and we're going to go to the polls and we're going to have to vote. When you stand there on that day, right now, which way would you vote, yes or no?
Well, and thank you, Sis, for your explanation on the sovereignty question, because I'd really like to see that as part of the legislation or even put in our constitution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, first people of this country, are the sovereign people of the lands. That would be amazing if Labor could do that. Because in Victoria, when it come to the treaty negotiations, Labor in Victoria refused to acknowledge that we were the sovereign people of the land. So we can talk about all the deadly treaties around the country, but we need national leadership on a treaty. We need to unite this country.
And if a voice could deliver that, sorry, Lidia, on the day, would you, which box will you tick? Right now.
Well, it depends how many lives we can save between now and then. Stan, in implementing the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, you know, if all the states and territories can agree to a voice, then why can't they agree to raise the age of legal responsibility so we can let our children out of these prisons, which you look in the Northern Territory right now, we're full of our children and our people. So
you're led to land on that.
Unless I see Labor move on those and include sovereignty into the Australian Constitution, that we are sovereign, or your legislation, then I'm not saying where I'm going. I want to see action.
So not yes or no
words.
yet? No, not yet.
I'm not saying which way I'm going until I see action.
I might before we move on, I might just come back to you, Craig, because you have been sitting and listening to...
People are waiting.
Yeah, you have been sitting and listening to a lot of this. I know that you've come to this with an open mind, you want to explore the issues, but you get around and talk to people in your other role with the Republican movement as well. What's your mood of the people that you speak to amongst the Australian people? What are you sensing?
Well, what concerns me actually is the media. And I spoke to one of the editors of one of the major mastheads last week and saying that I think where the conversation is going, which is reflected in the questions, is concerning, because it's much like our recent elections where, you know, the misinformation is not being challenged by the journalists. And so my question is, what is the underlying knowledge base that a journalist should have to be speaking to either the opposition leader or any of the dissenting voices in this area? And so all of a sudden the narrative can start to be built that there's no detail. And you've just heard here that, you know, the rebuttal to that,
but
right?
You're not following the detail.
And all of a sudden, so now Australia's starting to think, I think, improperly. And so my question to everyone I speak to is, well, have you read the co-design report from Calma and Langton? It's 272 pages long.
They're not adopting the Calma-Langton report, though, Craig. That's my point.
No, they said that it formed the foundations, the same as the previous government. The report, the recommendations, would form the foundations of moving forward, and that's guiding them.
Okay.
And that's what the
So if you haven't
working
read
group
it,
will...
That's right. So if journalists haven't read it, how can you carry the conversation in a real, authentic way and truthful way to the Australian people? That I think that they need that grounding. They need at least to have read it, so at least we can have a conversation like here tonight.
And we're having these conversations. We're hearing these questions. This is part of the process.
With the passing of our Queen, Elizabeth II, and the recent drama and controversy regarding Harry and Meghan, it seems Australia feels increasingly disconnected from the monarchy. Are the days of Australia's ties to the crown numbered?
I know what your answer to that is, but I'm going to go to you anyway.
Yeah, so.
Yes, Craig says. But how do we get there, Craig? I know the answer from you is yes, but...
The answer for Australia is yes, and it has been for some time. And so, you know, overwhelmingly, the research says that Australians are in favour of decolonisation, really, and this is one part of it. It's another part of it, right? Decolonisation of thinking and moving and walking together. And there's many reasons why Australia want to see that happen. The issue is the detail and what that model looks like.
And but we'll get to remember the last one, of course, was the detail.
That's right, exactly.
Can I ask you, and Tom, this might be on your mind as well, but we know we have the Voice referendum this year. You're obviously watching that to see how that potentially plays out. What is your timeline?
Well, ultimately, it's a timeline of the Albanese government, and we're talking about second referendum, second term of government, right? But the issue that we have, you know, with the millions of Australians who want to see that separation and us walking together with First Nations now and creating our own, you know, chapter in our history, for a variety of reasons, whether it's because of the hereditary title or it's because of the discriminatory nature of the monarchy, or whether it's because of the fast that's currently occurring and, you know, everyone's had a gutful, rightly, or whether it's because this distance now has become untenable, or it's because we're finally going back in time and dealing with these foundational questions at the centre of our history.
The issue, again, we'll come to the detail, won't it? I mean, you raised that. Before it was what model? Is it directly elected?
That's right.
Is it appointed by the Parliament? You're still going to have the same issues, aren't you, Craig?
Well, yes, and consensus needs to be built with Australians around that. The important point is that the support is there. So where do we go from here? So the ARM in recent years, about the last 3 years, did some significant research. I think it was over 10,000 Australians. And what they said was that they want at least some form of direct election, and I think rightly so. We want to make sure that someone's in that position who represents us. Currently, there's no accountability. We have no one with the interests of Australia at heart, and I just wonder what, with a symbolic president, if you like, someone who has limited reserve powers, but is the people's choice. I wonder, how the conversation would be different in Australia over the last 30, 50, 100 plus years if we had someone there holding the government accountable and asking many of the questions, including about First Nations dispossession and disadvantage that we're asking today. Someone to constantly be speaking for the Australian people. So the model, the Australian choice model, which I would welcome everyone going to the Republic website and reading, is about a hybrid model, which is candidates are put forward by all the state territories and 3 from the federal government, and then the Australian public having a direct election on those 11 candidates.
Can I just do a quick straw poll? Hands up if you're in favour of a republic right now. Wow, OK. And one on the panel as well. Another one on the panel. OK, Bridget.
OK, as the token constitutional monarchist
not without a treaty.
As the constitutional monarchist on the panel, not an absolute monarchist, but a constitutional monarchist, I think there's something very special about a system of government that keeps politics out of your head of state. I disagree, Craig, with a lot of the assumptions in the commentary around our Governor-General does have Australia's best interest at heart.
Well, that's questionable after what happened with Scott Morrison recently with his secret ministry.
There are numerous... Can I finish?
You can finish.
So there are numerous examples in our history of Governor-Generals standing up to Prime Ministers of the day. We've got Governor-General Casey, for instance, when McMahon wanted to snatch the Prime Ministership after Harold Holt disappeared and McEwen was after it. There's numerous examples through our history where Governor-Generals
have... You didn't go to John Kerr, but...
I'm happy to. But there are... Where the Governor-General has used those powers to either privately or publicly hold our PM to account, and that is important. And I believe it's important that that person isn't Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
No one's saying that. No,
political.
That's a completely
how much...
Now, we shouldn't go down that track, because this is what we see with The Voice.
That's where it
this is
will
what
go.
We see the misinformation.
How much,
we
Craig,
shouldn't be talking about... Everyone needs to be clear that a presidential system in the US is completely different to what Australia's ever been talking about.
Can you show me a president, a republic
I'll show you the model.
Can you show me a... Craig, I have a question. Can I...
You can.
Can I ask my question?
Sorry. Let's let Bridget...
I just haven't... I would like a republic on the globe where the presidential election hasn't been political. And whether it's France, whether it's America, wherever I can see, every president elected of a republic is a political figure in that country.
Well, I thought that Ireland did a wonderful job, and Mary Robinson, as a symbolic president, but as an elder, if you like, of Ireland, has become a hugely respected figure and the representative of the people. At the moment, we have no representative in that position, and that's what we're seeking, an Australian for Australians who can speak on our behalf and hold government accountable.
Yeah, Paul.
Craig, will a republic give back that true sovereignty of Indigenous Australians? We're only 3% of the national population of Australia. 97% decide our fate today under government colonial system.
Exactly.
If a treaty can assure us that no matter, numbers-wise, who votes, it's taken out of that system, that we are at the top of Australia.
I suppose that's something that Lidia raised before. And it does go to this final question on this before we move on. How much of what you're seeking to achieve is really linked to what happens this year? Can you imagine a referendum if this one is not necessarily successful?
Well, that's an imponderable, really. And, they are deeply linked, obviously, because this is about the future of Australia and dealing with the two big questions at the heart of it. The one thing I might say, just in answer to that, is that, you know, as the chair of the Republic movement, at the moment only for a few months, the first thing I said is that I'm very sensitive to the difficult balance to bringing Australia along, educating and having this discussion, while at the same time allowing the space for First Nations leaders, 3 of whom, you know, we have on the stage, or 4 of whom we have on the stage here tonight, to have that really important conversation.
So have you been distributing Harry's book to sort of spur things along? Has he been a help?
Stan, I just need to reiterate that we have to settle the country first before we go talking about Republic. So we need a treaty. An advisory body won't do that. If you go to Republic, then out goes everything that you're voting for this year. If you go for a treaty, that can last as long as we choose it to last, as long as the other sovereign does the right... Well, the Crown, who say that they are the sovereign, as long as they adhere to the laws of the treaty.
Yeah, well, it's no longer reconcilable, as you know, and we agree on this, Lidia, for Australia to walk this path, which we're finally walking, and still have these ties to, you know, 1788. So that has to go. But in response to your question, what I'd say is the sequencing is important. And so I think this is the right sequencing. We need to go back and deal with the wound at the heart of, you know, the psychology of Australia and the dispossession and the stolen land. All of this thing has to be resolved. Now, whether that's through treaty or through the voice... ultimately, that's what we're doing. And then, of course, the next step is for us now to walk together and apart.
Thank you, Stan. Just wanted to ask the panel, what would be your preferred Australia Day?
What date? Quickly. Craig.
A different date.
Lidia.
You can't change the date of dancing on our graves. You've got to deal with the impact of colonisation and have a treaty. So the day we have a treaty in this country is a day that we should celebrate.
Tom?
Yeah, well, I would go the other and say the day that we have we become a republic will be our foundational day.
Far be it from me to change Keating's National Day, but I think we voted, the people chose our flag, they chose our national anthem. If the people want to change it, let them choose the significant day.
Great.
Malarndirri.
The day we unify our country is the day that we should celebrate who we are as Australians.
Hear, hear.
Treaty.
Hear, hear.
And we do have a final question. We have time for that? OK. Makdi Bahadian.
Hey guys, my question's for Craig Foster. Have you had any thoughts about getting into politics?
Oh dear.
He's running for president.
After tonight, I didn't even know it was coming.
That's not one of your cousins.
I didn't even know it was coming. But after tonight, is politics, you know, you've been listening to the discussion. No?
Oh, look, I have considered it, there's no doubt. I don't know what will happen in the future, but I think this is... I was delighted to be asked to... You know, I think this is one of the big questions with the Republic that goes to the heart of who we are in future.
But it's something that's on your mind.
So this is something really passionate.
But politics is something that potentially...
Well, it has been, and yes, it is. You know, just trying to make a contribution to the country in some way. But I feel as though this is right at this moment. These two big questions we have to resolve.
You've got the 3 pollies here. Would you urge him to do it, Lidia?
I would say that, you know, you might consider having Nova Paris as your co-chair rather than your junior chair.
Well, you know...
In the name of reconciliation.
Well, thank you. You understand that I put forward a female co-chair on the first day that I walked into the organisation. You're aware of that, right? And so, so I'm hopeful. We have meetings in coming weeks, and I'm really hopeful that...
Well, you may get to vote for Craig at some point. Thank you again for your question.
We need a black president.
That's almost all we have time for. Thanks again to our panel, Malarndirri and McCarthy, Bridget McKenzie, Tom Calma, Lidia Thorpe and Craig Foster. Please thank them.
Okay. Thank you.